Up first, hazardous weather graphic. There's a high wind warning out here for the central Aleutians, which includes Adak and Atka, and that's due to a big storm down to the south. It'll be edging northward, actually coming northeastward here, but it'll stay south of the Aleutian and Alaska chain. It'll be close enough with a tight enough pressure gradient that winds expected to increase out of the east and northeast. Let's see, that goes into effect for tomorrow, Thursday. And looking for northeast winds, possibly gusting as high as 85 miles an hour. And then off to the east here, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. High wind watch out for the same system. And that's for tomorrow into tomorrow evening. And that's for looking for southeast winds. Could possibly gust as high as 75 miles per hour, especially places like Nikolsky and over Cold Bay and those areas. Again, that's out tomorrow through tomorrow evening, Thursday evening. And then off to the east here, we've got a winter or a high wind watch out for Prince of Wales Island. That's for tonight, and that's for Craig, Klawock, Heidelberg, Kaufman Cove, and Thorn Bay there for gusts to 60 miles an hour out of the southeast, sustained winds in the 20 to 30 mile per hour range, but could be some gusts to 60 miles an hour. Then over east there, that's a heavy snow watch out for specifically Hyder, city of Hyder, for possibly 12 to 14 inches of snow out for actually tonight through Thursday afternoon. By tomorrow afternoon, you may pick up a total of 12 to 14 inches of snow. So moving on to satellite imagery, you can see the northward progression of that storm. Center still well to the south here, but quite a fetch of moisture all the way down off the picture here, streaming right on up, beginning to increase the rain here and wind over the southern panhandle today. Still the heaviest weather occurring over the Queen Charlotte Island areas there. And then up to the north, some clouds here with a trough and areas of light snow all the way down into northern Cook Inlet. But southern Cook Inlet clearing out today. Homer, clear skies most of the day down into Kodiak Island. Pretty nice conditions. We had moisture all the way down to the North Gulf Coast and up to the north. Still cold over the north slope there, anywhere from 35 to 45 degrees below zero. Another band of clouds dropping down toward the Arctic coast there, but any precipitation with that pretty light. And a weak system here bringing rain and snow showers into the eastern Aleutians. That's all south of the Pribilof Islands. And then also coming onto the edge here, the Cirrus Shield with the next big storm that'll be bringing those 85 mile an hour wind gusts into Adak and Atka during the day tomorrow. On the chart today, you can see the moisture with that. Still the low center well off the chart there. A weaker system here over the eastern Aleutians brought rain and snow showers to the eastern Aleutian areas. Basically dry and really light winds and snowfall levels down towards sea level, especially up toward the Pribilof. Band of light snow or snow showers right through here, Nunivak Island, out to the west there, then clearing out up to the north with dry conditions, light winds all the way into the Chukchi Sea, North Slope, Arctic coast, and then this trough through the central interior, kind of slowly moving northeastward and east-northeast, clearing out behind it, as I mentioned, Kodiak Island, the southern Cook Inlet, Iliamna, Kamishak Bay, and those areas, but Cordova picking up about 4 inches of snow today. That's tapered off this afternoon. Areas of light snow persisting into the afternoon from about Kenai northward, Anchorage, Palmer, or Anchorage up towards Birchwood, Eagle River, and to a lesser extent in the Manuska Valley. Susitna Valley picking up about 2 inches of snow today, and anywhere from 1 to 2 inches falling there in the Nenana to Fairbanks area, and then lighter amounts on up to the north. And for tonight, you'll see this system here makes a pretty good jog right up to the coast, that frontal boundary there, right up to the coast of Prince of Wales Island. That's when you could expect the strongest winds to occur with those gusts possibly to 60 miles per hour there. Otherwise, again, the heavy snow watch out for Hyder kicks into effect tonight. And moisture probably all the way up to the border there, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, but that'll be in the form of snow. Lingering snow showers for tonight, Prince William Sound. Drying out here over northern Cook Inlet in the Susitna Valley. Still some lingering snow showers in the Tanana Valley up towards the Yukon Flats area. And pretty dry, though, over the central and western interior with pretty light winds as well. And clear skies, mostly clear, Kodiak Island. Some clearing here over the southwest interior as well as the central interior. Now that 959 millibar low center making its approach here, just coming onto the chart. Winds will start to increase late tonight with rain and snow also on the increase there. And then this trough bringing some, keeping it unsettled over the eastern Aleutians of the western Alaska Peninsula. Northern Bering Sea looking pretty good. Light winds, chilly temperatures, and dry conditions all the way up western interior through the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Sea. And then for tomorrow, that low center comes northward, beginning to take a turn to the east-northeast now. So it will not cross the Aleutians, but that gradient tight enough there on the north side of that frontal boundary in the low center could see those gusts up to 85 miles an hour for especially Adak and possibly Atka as well. High wind watches out 75 mile an hour east-southeast winds for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. And a big widespread area of rain and snow with that. Snow maybe reaching St. George Island tomorrow afternoon. Maybe not, kind of right on the edge there, but those winds increasing, probably see the winds gradually increasing there for the central Bering Sea. Winds stay light over the northern Bering Sea. And a weak trough or weak thing here over the west central interior could still kick off some snow showers there. Dry for the north slope, variably cloudy all the way up to the Arctic coast, and light winds. Light winds, southern Alaska. Look for mostly clear conditions tomorrow. Cook Inlet into the Susitna Valley. Mostly cloudy for the Matanuska Valley, probably some clearing there in Prince William Sound. Copper River Basin holding on to the clouds and chances of snow showers. That'll extend over the eastern Alaska Range into the 40-mile country there. This system keeps wind and rain, possibly heavy at times, here over the southern southeast coast. Lighter amounts up to the north in the form of rain or snow, depending on your elevation there. And then for Friday, this system tracks up to right to the Alaska Peninsula there. Cold air coming southward on the back side of that and increasing northeast winds, so snow, maybe blowing snow for the Pribilof Islands and rain changing to snow for the eastern Aleutians as snowfall levels crash to sea level. Mixture of precipitation up along the Alaska Peninsula. Snow and blowing snow northwestern Bristol Bay into the Kuskokwim Delta. Some light snow getting into the Yukon Delta. Dry out toward the coast there, dry central interior up to the north, and a thing up there could kick off some flurries for the eastern Arctic coast. Rain and snow and wind, big increase here in the wind, especially in advance of this front, probably storm warnings for the Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast. Increasing wind, rain, and snow for the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound. Improving over the Panhandle, that system now off to the east, the trough exiting the area, bringing the best chance of rain and snow showers early on, and then look for some clearing and drier conditions into Friday afternoon and evening in that area. And moving on to temperatures, lows for tonight, upper 20s north to mid 30s to the south there and out toward the coast for the Panhandle. Lows a shade below zero maybe in the Susitna Valley with this clearing skies tonight. Single numbers elsewhere in Alaska, 0 to 10 above. And a little below zero in the Copper River Basin, about 10 to 15 below there in the Kuskokwim Valley, mid-teens for Kodiak. Highs tomorrow, right around zero in the Kuskokwim Valley, 5 to 10 Copper River Basin, lower 30s Kodiak Island, and 15 to 25 south central Alaska. Mid-30s over toward Yakutat and the northern Panhandle to lower 40s on down toward Heidelberg and Ketchikan. Lows in the upper 30s for Metlakatla, call it 26 there for Haines on Friday morning, and 10 to 20 below in the Copper River Basin, as well as the Kuskokwim Valley, and 0 to 15 below for the Susitna Valley, right around zero. Palmer, Anchorage down to Kenai, Soldotna, maybe dropping 5 below there, down to 10 for Homer, mid-20s for Kodiak Island, followed by highs in the upper 30s Friday afternoon, teens, south central Alaska, 5 to 15 Kuskokwim Valley, around 0 to 10 for the Copper River Basin for the highs, and in the 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast. Up to the north, lows tonight 15 to 25 below. Coldest north slope to the Arctic coast, mid-30s below zero there from Umiat Airfield, if not colder, out toward the eastern Arctic coast. Highs tomorrow below zero, staying below zero. Fairbanks may warm to 0. Eagle might push up to 3, but back below 0 for Friday morning, followed by highs, not much difference, staying maybe edging above 0 a little bit here from Fairbanks eastward, below 0 everywhere else. Notice the Friday afternoon high there at Savunga, 13 below. Out to the west, lows below 0 along the coast, lower 20s to the Pribilofs, and 30 to 35 elsewhere, actually upper 20s to lower 30s, upper 20s for the Alaska Peninsula. And for tomorrow, highs in the 30s, mid-20s to the Pribilofs, staying below 0 there for the southwest coast. And then highs, or Friday morning lows in the lower 30s, and 20 for the Pribilofs, and then highs mid-20s for the Pribilofs and upper 30s to the lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, we've got a lot of IFR coming into the southeast coast of that storm system moving northward, spreading all the way up into Lincoln Island Glacier Bay by tomorrow morning. Big area of IFR here over the central interior up to the southern slopes of the Brooks Range. Small zone here in the Kuskokwim Valley down to Iliamna Lake, and then some VFR around the Pribilofs, northern Bering Sea out to the west. And then you can see the IFR zone just showing up late tonight with that next big storm coming into the Aleutians, and that spreads northward throughout the day, eastward across the Fox Islands and back to the west to Amchitka Island. Improving as you head north, VFR, northern Bering Sea, much of interior Alaska now, especially southern Alaska, VFR, Kodiak Island VFR, marginal VFR with a band of IFR here over the east and northeast interior, but the Arctic coast VFR and Chukchi Sea as well. Panhandle with all that moisture flowing northward, IFR flying conditions just about everywhere. And then for the morning time frame on Friday, improving here over the southeast coast, still some lingering IFR there over the southeast portions, Hyder, Stewart, and those locations, maybe Wrangell, but becoming VFR out toward the coast and to the north. Southern Alaska still VFR. IFR now over the east and northeast interior up to about Barter Island, Kaktovik. IFR spreading in across southern Kodiak Island Friday morning. Southeast Bering Sea here to the central Aleutian areas. And northern Bering Sea stays VFR right through Friday afternoon, as you can see into the Chukchi Sea. Central eastern Arctic coast, areas of IFR. Some IFR there over the eastern Brooks Range. Central interior looking really good Friday afternoon as conditions deteriorate here across southern Alaska, especially along the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Barren Island, southern Cook Inlet area, into Resurrection Bay, IFR, and Shelikof Strait, southern Kodiak Island, IFR, and a band here over the northern Bering Sea, and again holding VFR all the way into the Chukchi Sea, marginal VFR for the central and western Aleutians. And for the passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR, Adigan, marginal as well. Lake Clark and Merrill looking really good for Thursday, VFR flying for rainy as well, and windy VFR. Isabel, marginal VFR, could become VFR in the afternoon toward evening. And Mentasta, marginal VFR becoming VFR, at least trending that direction, better in the afternoon than early on. And for Tanita, VFR, either approach and portage, same forecast, good VFR, both west and east entrances and through the pass. Chilkoot and White, though, IFR the entire day. And for the freezing levels, just south of the Pribilofs here, give or take, and then across the Alaska Peninsula, east side of Kodiak Island, up along the North Gulf Coast, 2,000 feet with the warmer southerly flow, 2,000 feet only coming up to Prince of Wales Island there, and then staying well south of the Aleutians. And as far as icing goes, that system with the low center staying to the south, but the front extending northward here, so look for some considerable moderate rime icing. Freezing level is 16,000 feet, pushing into the eastern Aleutians, extending back to about Adak, and also south to north flow here, pushing the heaviest icing, considerable moderate in over the southern panhandle, with some possible areas of considerable moderate rime icing to the north there, and then icing all the way up and beyond White and Chilkoot passes. And for the jet stream, strongest jet just east of the Panhandle, though clipping the eastern or the southeast portion there, say Stewart and Hyder, about 115 knots, but much lighter to the west here. Northwest 100 knots, just south of Kodiak Island. Light flow over the interior. Westerlies, 65 to 80 knots, coming right into the Yukon Delta coast. And moving to 9,000 feet, low pressure coming up to just south of Adak. South winds 60 knots into the Fox Islands. Easterlies 55 knots on the northern quadrant of that system, turning north at 55 down to the southwest. Not too bad wind-wise over interior Alaska. Kind of a breezy condition here. Shelikof Strait, Barren Islands area across Kodiak. South 45 for the Panhandle. And at 3,000 feet, strongest wind staying south of the Panhandle through the afternoon, but you can see stronger winds coming up to the north there. And winds 50 to 70 knots. Southern Bering Sea and the Aleutians translates into quite an area of moderate turbulence. Alaska Peninsula all the way out to Kiska Island, as well as the southern Panhandle gradually lifting to the north. The interior looking pretty good.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined once again by the science liaison of GINA, Eric Stevens. GINA, of course, is the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And GINA is all about satellites, and Eric is always here to tell some really cool stuff about satellites. Now, the last time you were here, we talked about how the weather satellites can see clouds and what's under the clouds, but you're telling me that satellites can do a lot more, even protect the general public with aviation safety information.
That's right. There's one particular aspect of satellites we're going to talk about today that might not be immediately obvious, and that is detecting things in the atmosphere that are not clouds, that are not snow, not rain, but rather a hazard that can happen here in Alaska, and that is volcanic ash.
Of course.
When a volcano goes off, puts ash in the air, this is of course a hazard to the public if the ash were to fall on the ground in accumulating amounts.
Sure.
Additionally, while the ash is in the air, and this is the more frequent hazard, is it's a hazard to aviation because you cannot fly an airplane into volcanic ash without great risk. Worst case scenario, the ash gets into a jet engine, wrecks the engine, kills the engine, and now you have an airplane flying with no engines. It won't fly for long. So aviators need to avoid that ash. How do you avoid the ash? You have to know where it is by identifying it with a satellite image and perhaps predicting then where the ash will flow with the overall weather patterns. Satellites are so important for identifying when a volcano goes off and then tracking the ash after the volcano injects the ash into the atmosphere.
Now, are you talking about seeing the heat signature or a huge volcanic plume with a cloud that we're used to seeing in the really pretty pictures of any Alaska volcano that's erupted recently, Redoubt, for example? Or are we talking about the really fine details? Because this is polar orbiting satellites, the ones that are very low to the ground, right?
The geostationary satellites can do some detection. The polar orbiters, like you say, they're closer to the Earth. They give the even better view. In answer to your question, I would say all of the above.
Oh, okay.
A heat signature from a volcano going off with all the heat that comes with the eruption, that can be identified in infrared imagery.
Okay.
We've got images from the Kamchatka Peninsula. That's the far eastern part of Russia on the western side of the Bering Sea, loaded with volcanoes.
Right.
You know, Alaska has plenty of volcanoes of its own. We can also be affected when a volcano goes off in Kamchatka, say, and then the weather carries that ash toward Alaska from the west.
Right.
You can see the infrared heat signature, like you say. Also, the ash in the air can be detected by doing some sophisticated channel differencing within the satellite data. You can find the identification of sulfur dioxide, say, that's a component of the volcanic emission, and you can trace this with the satellite imagery. Sometimes volcanoes go off that haven't gone off before, and we're not expecting them to go off. Say if there's no seismometers around a given volcano that hasn't gone off in 100 years, you might not be expecting it to go off in the satellite imagery. Since satellites can be globally comprehensive, that might be the first sign that you have that a volcano in an unexpected area is going off.
So it's a good backup system. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
Right. And people are working all the time on automating the interrogation of satellite data by computers to provide a first alert to a human. So the software will say, we think this might be important. Human, go take a closer look. Because the people are still the best way to interrogate the imagery imagery, but the planet's a big place, and we can't be looking everywhere all the time, so the software helps give a first cut. And then in Alaska, there's a special kind of surprise angle where the satellites are helpful, and that is the Katmai eruption of 1912. Huge eruption. There is still somewhat of a moonscape out there in southwest Alaska where all this ash is laying on the ground. And sometimes a strong weather pattern comes along where we have roaring northwest winds that go across the Alaska Peninsula there and can actually pick some of this ash up off the ground. No volcano is going off. This was more than 100 years ago that volcano actually blew. So you're not going to see a heat signature like we were discussing. There will be no seismic signature of a volcano going off. So those data sets, they'll say, oh, no problem. But you can see in some of the satellite imagery this ash, as it's called, resuspended. When the wind comes along, picks it up, the ash can be lofted a few thousand feet in the air just with the wind. And an airplane flying into that plume is exposed to some danger. So we need to track that ash to provide guidance to aviators that you don't want to be flying here at these elevations in this area. We've got some imagery of the resuspension, and you can see the wind blowing strongly from the northwest, picking up the ash and blowing it down to the southeast. And so that's another, perhaps not immediately obvious hazard of volcanic ash. Katmai is the gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
Very good. So we've got satellites that can help us understand the weather from the past and the immediate past, and we talked last time about how that's feeding into the forecast modeling to help improve predictions, but now they're also protecting the general public with aviation sensitive information and watching volcanoes, whether they're erupting or maybe have erupted in the past, and finding the left behinds from those volcanic events there. So really impressive stuff. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again today, and you're a gift that keeps on giving from the satellite community, so thanks a lot, and we hope to have you back again soon. Again, Eric Stevens with Gina at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And if you'd like to check out any of the information that Eric has shared with us again today, you can do that very easily by going to www.gina.alaska.edu. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at the ice edge, today's sea ice analysis, showing it right along here, still well north of St. Paul Island, south though, and southwest of St. Matthew Island, as it has been. And that's going to start to, with northeast winds on the increase, cold air coming southward late Friday and into the weekend. This will kind of speed up and advance to the southwest later in the weekend, maybe in the first next week. And from there, going to the coastal water forecast for the south coast tomorrow, small craft advisory, southeast winds 25 knots. And for the north coast, east-northeast winds 25 to 35 knots. And north 25, higher gusts, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north at 20 knots, 4-foot seas. Clarence Strait, southeast winds 30 knots, 6-foot seas. And then for the day on Friday, northwest winds 35 knots there for the south coast, and west-southwest 35 to 40 knots for the north coast, with seas running anywhere from 12 to 14 feet along the coastline. And then Lynn Canal, southeast at 15, seas 3 feet. Stevens Passage, southeast at 20. And small craft advisories for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 25 knots. And for the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, northwest winds 25 knots with higher gusts, Prince William Sound. Northwest at 25, higher gusts there as well, seas at about 5 feet. Light variable winds for northern Cook Inlet, 10 knots. North 15 here, south of the Forelands. Northwest 25 knots for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay area, seas 5 to 7 feet. And then for Friday, northern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, north winds increasing to 25 knots. Gale warning, southern Cook Inlet, northeast winds 35 knots and northeast 40 knots for Kamishak Bay. Barren Islands, gale warnings, southeast 35 knots. And the North Gulf Coast, east-southeast winds 35 to 40 knots. And Prince William Sound, northeast winds 25 knots. For Kodiak Island on Thursday, west winds 20 knots, seas 4 to 6 feet. Bristol Bay, north winds at about 10 knots. And gale warnings for the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula for south winds up to 40 knots. Bering Sea side, northeast winds at 30 knots. For the day Friday, gale warnings again, Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula here, southwest at 40 knots, north 30 knots there for the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Full gales there for Bristol Bay, northeast at 40 knots, and Kodiak Island, east to south winds, 30 to 35 knots. Storm warnings for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow. East-southeast winds right around 50 knots. Storm warnings for the central Aleutians. East winds 50 to 55 knots. Turn northeast 45 knots Amchitka Island. And then drop off to 30 knots towards Shimianatu from the north. And western Aleutians on Friday, lighter winds north at about 20 knots. Gale warnings for the Adak-Atka area. North winds 35 to 40 knots. Gale warnings for the eastern Aleutians. North to northwest winds 35 to 40 knots. Southwest coast tomorrow, northeast winds 15 to 25 knots. Northeast 25, St. Matthew Island. Gale warnings for the Pribilofs, east winds increasing to 40 knots in the latter part of the afternoon. Northeast 15 there for St. Lawrence Island. And then for Friday, gale warnings for the Pribilofs and the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Both areas there should see north winds at 45 knots, northwest 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, west 30 for the Yukon Delta coast, north winds at 30 knots for St. Lawrence Island. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, up here, east winds 10 to 15 knots, light east winds 10 knots for the central and western Arctic coast, and for the Chukchi Sea, north winds at about 15 knots. And then brisk wind advisories for the Chukchi Sea on Friday, north 25 knots, western Arctic coast here, northeast at 20 knots, east winds 20 knots for the central and eastern Arctic coastal areas. For tonight, got this frontal system coming northward. That's going to increase the wind and rain, becoming moderate to heavy at times late tonight for the southern panhandle with precipitation all the way up into northern Lynn Canal. Diminishing precipitation here over the eastern interior to the North Gulf Coast. Not too bad over the remainder of Alaska with some clearing. And this system here brings high wind warnings into Adak and Atka tomorrow. High wind watches the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, 75 to 85 mile an hour wind gusts in those areas. Dry, light winds, maybe sunshine. Pretty good chance here over the southwest interior into Cook Inlet down to Kodiak Island. Chance of snow showers, a couple of weak systems there in the interior. And wind, rain, and snow for the southeast coast. Improves during the day on Friday, and a downturn in the weather with increasing wind, rain, and snow for southern Alaska.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.